like to call to order the joint meeting with Board of Ed and Board of County Commissioners. And as we all like to do, we'll start with Pledge of Allegiance and a moment of silence. I'm going to pray for focus.
We'll pray for you.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I want to thank everybody for coming together and doing the meeting. We saw you guys jogging across the parking lot, and we knew it was time. And again, we have a brief agenda, and I think if anybody has any questions, holler. And do you guys want to say anything?
Yeah, I'll start with the first agenda item, which is the charter school process. I'll just start us off by giving some information about what we know and then allowing for discussion and questions, if that's okay. As you're aware, we have received an application for a charter school in CCPS, which is the first we've received in about a decade, and only the second formal application ever that we've had. The application was received on March 31st, and under Maryland, it must be reviewed and acted on within 120 days. If a charter school were to open, it would be for the 26-27 school year, so not next school year, but the year after. The charter school application and the prospect of a charter school opening has become a discussion item in the public, especially with our ongoing budget issues. Therefore, at our most recent Board of Education meeting, we asked Mr. O'Mealy, our legal counsel, to provide an overview on the charter school law and the process for approval under law. We've included that presentation in the packet for you today. We're not going to present it today, but we just wanted you to have that for reference. And I want to cover just a few of the main points, and then we'll respond to any questions or discussion, including Mr. O'Mealy in any questions regarding the law. So under Maryland law, charter schools in Maryland are public schools. So that means that the Board of Ed is the authorizer and the applicant is the operator. The Board of Education funds the charter school operator on a per pupil.
I apologize. Say it one more time.
Yes. Under Maryland law, charter schools in Maryland are public schools. The Board of Education is the authorizer of the charter school, and then the applicant is the operator of the charter school. The Board of Education funds the charter school operator on a per pupil allocation. So just like we fund any other school, they would get the per pupil allotment. The charter school would be tuition free, and parents would choose to send their children. It would be open to all students residing within Carroll County. If there are more students who apply than we have seats, then there would have to be a formal lottery system for selection.
Run by the operators or run by the Board
Run
of
by
Education?
us, and we would.
Run by the Board of Education?
Yes,
Oh,
and we would
okay.
most likely have Mr. O'Mealy handle that.
What we did when St. Mary's County opened a public charter school about a dozen years ago, they brought in a retired circuit judge, Judge John Hanson Briscoe, who oversaw the lottery, pulled the names out of the tumbler. So it was a perfectly transparent, neutral, colorblind process.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Charter schools may apply for waivers of local policies to the Board of Ed and to state policies to the State Board of Education. But certain things may not be waived. So again, if they don't want to do things the way the rest of the schools do them, they can apply for a waiver either with us, if it's Board of Education policy, or the state, if it's state policy. Charter school employees are employees of the Board of Ed, and they are covered by the same appropriate union bargaining agreement. There are factors and conditions that we and the Board of Education must apply when reviewing and approving a charter school application, which we're in the process of reviewing it right now. Many of these rules have been established by the State Board of Education through decisions it has rendered over the past 20 years. So we're looking at a lot of appellate law. In general, the application must be reviewed and approved or denied on its merits based on the state law, state board rulings, and the criteria in our local policy, regulations, and application document. So I think that gives some main points of discussion out there, and we'd be happy to take questions at this point.
So if this is approved, it'd be the only charter school in the county, so I'm assuming any child anywhere in the county could apply to go. Let's say, for instance, a second one is established at some point, just hypothetically. Is there a regional component at that point where kids have to be from a certain area to attend it, or it's just always going to be countywide?
At this point, it would always be countywide, yeah.
If I could, the one exception to that would be in the event that a current existing public school facility that has an attendance zone for that particular school was converted into a charter school. Those are less frequent, but that is still something that is possible under Maryland's charter law. So a school could be converted to a charter school, and you would serve the kids in that attendance area.
Thank you.
Couple just quick, did you mention transportation to and from the school?
I did not mention that, and that's something that the charter school has to put within their application, how they would want to handle transportation.
So the bargaining for teachers and all the other, I mean, it's just with the teachers that you would be,
It's all bargaining units,
it's all bargaining units?
all 5.
Okay, so they will all be a part of this. Transportation is still an unknown, and it would be up to the charter school applicants or operators to
Right.
determine what's,
Right, we're still going through the application right now, looking at that. At this point, I don't think that the charter school would be looking to provide parents with transportation. I think it would be a situation where parents would have to transport.
and then the only, I think, other question I have is, besides, someone applying to do this, why is this happening? Why is a charter school even being considered by a group? And what's the intent of, I've seen it only on the very outside, from an article in the Times or something, but why is a group wanting to establish a charter school? I'm pretty proud of our public school system, as my kids went through them. I mean, so what would this offer or differ than CCPS? Or is it just another, well, it would still be another CCPS school?
Right, it would be another CCPS public school, but, the point of a charter school is just to allow for a little more creativity or out-of-the-box thinking, for students to meet the same achievement goals that our regular public schools have. And every charter school operator has a different reason for wanting to open and operate that school. In this case, it looks a lot like this charter school operator is interested in hitting our state framework standards and objectives through using different kinds of curricula or different kinds of instructional methodologies that we may use in most of our schools. Mr. Shockney or Mr. O'Neill, do you want to add anything to that?
I think the reasons for the state law are probably twofold: to offer a type of parent choice, but within the public school framework, and to offer something different or innovative than an ordinary one of our schools. And so in this case, this applicant is looking at a classical education framework as the different curriculum approach than in a regular school.
Do we still have, in our school system, children that have the opportunity to attend another school
Yes.
within the county?
Yes, we still
And-
have open enrollment schools, and as long as the parent transports.
Has the ability to transport?
Yes.
Yeah,
Unless the school is what we would deem overcrowded.
okay. Yeah, now, that could be whether it's academics or athletics or whatever, but it's not going from one school and then stopping, going to another, stopping, it's, you're enrolling, at some point you're staying in that school, that's the
Yes.
intent,
Yes.
correct? Yeah,
We have safeguards in our policies and procedures for.
that they don't bounce around.
Yeah.
Correct.
Right.
So can I ask, going back to the funding for this, how to go about paying for it, are any of the costs going to be distinct? I mean, for example, where do they, capital funding, would this be something that the county would have to provide for debt service? The pay scale, is it going to be any different for teachers at a charter school versus like a typical public school? And then, is a charter school blueprint affected?
So a charter school is blueprint affected, just like every other public school. They have to, as I said, they need to follow all of our bargaining unit agreements, so all of their teachers would be on the same salary scales as teachers in other schools. And as far as the capital costs, the charter school would have to provide their own building. So we wouldn't be spending any capital on the building itself. Mr. O'Neill, anything to add to that?
That's it. The state law says something close to charter schools are funded commensurate with other public schools on a per pupil allotment. And so there's a formula, and the state board has sort of legislated that funding methodology through decisions over time, including 2 decisions since Blueprint was enacted. And so the Blueprint funding pattern affects the per pupil allocation of a charter school, and also the public charter school will have to report its expenditures at the school level, just like all of our other schools. So this whole thing we've been immersed in with Blueprint fiscal compliance applies there. They'll need to spend special ed money on special ed services and comp ed money and so forth and so on.
And so once if the application is approved and if the charter school is established, the building that they select to house themselves in, the maintenance costs of that will end up being something that have to be provided? Or is a charter school
I'd say indirectly. So some of the funding streams are tied down as in Blueprint as any other school, but there are more line items in the funding formula in the per pupil allotment than just those Blueprint specific programs. And so that would be money on which the operator of the charter school would run their business, so to speak. And whether it's buying or leasing or maintaining a facility, all of those things would have to happen there. They can also fundraise a little bit differently, I think, than an ordinary public school. Am I missing anything, Ed?
No, their alliance would be a 501c3 entity that is able to accept donations for which somebody could write off on their taxes. And so that's what most charter school alliances do. They do their own fundraising. Some are better at it than others, obviously. We are responsible for funding pursuant to the formula, which equates to approximately 98% of the average per pupil expenditure for the school system as a whole. And so that enables them to either purchase services from the school system or purchase services that can be purchased commercially. They have that option for some things. With respect to the employee bargaining units, they are still our employees. They are still employees of the school system. They are not employed by the Charter Alliance. the Charter Alliance operates the school, but the employees are still Board of Ed employees, so they're still paid through the Board of Ed's payroll system. Teachers are still eligible for tenure within the school system. They're subject to discipline under the same rules as any other teacher. They're entitled to the same due process protections, and that applies also to the students. They're subject to the same due process provisions for suspensions and other forms of discipline. They're eligible for special education, reasonable accommodations for disabilities. In the event that they're an English language learner, they'd be eligible for those benefits under federal law as well. Free and reduced meals would also be applicable. So in every sense, in Maryland, which is not necessarily the same in other states, in Maryland they are truly public charter schools. But the charter authorizer, being the board, has kind of a supervisory role to make sure that they are acting with fidelity to the charter that has been approved. And then the charter operator needs to make sure that they are internally compliant and that they are continuing to meet what they projected to meet in their application, the innovation here being a classical approach.
And I would just add to that, when we're talking about funding, one of the questions that I keep being asked is, if the charter school gets the same per pupil allotment that every other student and every other school gets, why is it going to cost more money for us to operate? Like, we'll be coming to you and saying, if this application goes through, we have a new charter school starting up, that's going to cost us X millions of dollars to start up. The reason that it's going to cost us more money, even though they get the per pupil allotment, is that currently, let's say, if most of the students that they bring to their school are currently registered in other Carroll County public schools, they're going to be pulling one student out of this classroom, one student out of another classroom in another school, and they're all going to converge on this one school. That means that we still have to teach those students, but now they're being pulled out into a separate place, and so that's where their allotment is going. It's I kind of like to think about it as, how did we save money when we closed 3 schools? Because we still had the same number of students. The reason we saved money is that we took those students from those 3 schools and we integrated them into all the other schools, and for the most part, we could add 2 or 3 students here and it didn't affect class size that much, and 2 or 3 over here and 1 over here. And then we got rid of the other costs associated with running 3 other schools. So I think that's the thing that's confusing to people, is it could cost us funding, it could cost money for us, even though the students or the school will get the per pupil allotment. Now, that wouldn't be the case if all of the students that go to this new charter school, if it were to go through, if they were all students from other places. So if they were all students coming back from homeschooling or private schools or other places like that, then that wouldn't cost us very much at all. So I know it's kind of complicated.
We actually gain revenue.
Yeah, we would gain
We would gain
revenue
revenue if those
if
students
that
came to the
happened.
system.
Yeah.
It's the, if I may.
Go ahead.
It's the lag in the year of opening. So
Yeah.
even if 100% of their students are homeschooled today or private schooled or not enrolled in Carroll County Public Schools, the funding to the Board of Ed won't appear until the subsequent fiscal year when those students become part of the September 30 enrollment count. And so it's that startup year that's a lag. There's just a lag in those 2 timelines. And so it's kind of like that might be the ask in that first year of opening.
What about extracurriculars?
Oh,
How will
just-
they be treated, and career and tech?
Same, they can access any of the programs that any of our other public school students can access.
But they need to, if they want a football team, they need to have one. The kids can't go to South Carroll or somewhere.
Correct.
They gotta stay at their own school. What about utilities and snow removal, and is that on them or on you guys?
That's on them through the per pupil allocation that's not blueprint tied down or other funding they raise or receive in grants, et cetera. It's their facility, it's not a publicly owned facility.
So yeah, it definitely seems like there's a whole lot more questions there are. It's confusing. I mean, one, why would homeschool and private schools attend a charter school as opposed to attend our public schools if the charter school is just another public school? So I mean, this thought that everybody now in homeschool is going to now be a part of this charter school, I'm not sure I'm grasping. But is this group that wants to do this, and they're established, are they a 501c3 now?
I think so,
Yes.
yes.
So they are a 501c3. So as a 501c3, they have the ability to raise money. And they're raising money for capital. I mean, that's typically what a 501c3 will do, to build something, whether it be restricted or unrestricted as a 501c3. Are you aware if that's what they're doing? Are they raising restricted and unrestricted funds? Do we know this? And how close are they to building out a school? And then, because you got the capital side and you got the operational side. And it sounds like they're more, until you said something about the snow removal, they're more in line with the capital side than they are on the operational. But then there's the operational, you know, logistics piece of it that I didn't know, that was kind of a new one to me as well, was that they're also responsible for.
It's probably mainly a capital concern.
Yeah.
And I'll just speak in general, not necessarily this applicant. Just historically what I've seen in Maryland with other charter schools, there's the capital concern, whether it's a lease or purchasing a building, any renovations that go along with that as well, plus then the maintenance and upkeep. There's also probably some operational concerns that might rise to the level of a need for fundraising. Typically, charter school operators would want to have some sort of a non-CCPS employee present, sort of running the business of the organization, typically like an executive director title or something like that, and so that
Yeah,
has
that's
to be
the
paid for as well.
501c3, yeah,
And the
portion.
and the PPA or the per pupil allocation may not well cover all of that, so I think it's probably all of those things. Also, there's a state agency or a quasi-agency that formed or evolved over it's been about 20 years now of a charter school law ed, that can offer startup grants. And so I'm sure most applicants apply for those startup grants from the state, and that's a way to sort of front some of those costs to get up and running and then build into greater fundraising opportunities, et cetera.
Yeah, but if you count on a grant and that grant dries up, then you're running the facility without that grant. So,
Yeah,
just like positions, when you grant some position and that grant dries up, then you're either gonna get rid of that position or you're gonna have to fund it. I mean, that's the challenge with grants. I mean, and then, same thing with leasing something. If you're leasing a facility and that lease runs out, you know, that was one of the issues with the Army Reserve Center. You know, we were looking to lease that building for a nonprofit, and in order for us to lease that building, we had to commit to 30 years of service for that facility, and we could not, or would not at that point, commit to 30 years. So leasing is always a concern. You know, personally, I'm familiar with a lot of this because I did something very similar, you know, by raising $5 million and establishing a 501c3 to build a building, actually to renovate a building and provide services. Most of that money was for capital costs. and we looked at others for operational costs. So,
It's, I think all of that's fair, and that, I think anybody, including someone running a charter school in Maryland today or an applicant today would tell you it's challenging.
Yeah.
It's challenging for the Board of Ed to open a school. And we're the Board of Ed, you know. It's a two-step process, sort of we're at the application stage, and getting an application approved is step one, and then if the application is approved, it moves into the actual charter agreement itself, the contract. And Ed would have more experience than me, obviously, across the state, but I've seen those charter agreements be for 3 years or 5 years or a set period of time. And if for some reason the operator can't sustain the operation of the school beyond that window of time, or even during that window of time, then there would be provisions in the charter agreement to terminate the charter.
but you're putting kids at risk when you're doing that. If you establish a school and have a 3 to 5 year window of, operations, and unfortunately, a lot of 501c3s have a history of folding, I mean, that's just by the numbers, then if you're occupying that school with a 501c3 for 3, 4, 5 years, whatever it may be, and then you close, then you gotta redistribute those students in the
Correct.
community.
I'm hopeful Ed would pipe up, but I guess the
Hopeful
state,
is a
the
hard-
state would say
horrible
that's
word.
part of the parent choice that's being
Right,
made.
that's right. It is always a choice option. It is never something that students are assigned to. So parents would have to, and we would expect that they would, recognize that in the event that the charter provider is not compliant with the law or the terms of the charter agreement, that the Board of Education does have the right, and I would say further the duty, to revoke the charter. And that's happened a couple of times. And in those situations, the students go back to their home attendance area schools. And so they're never in quite the same situation as, for example, when a private school closes. And now
Right.
the parent of a student attending a private school that is no longer in operation needs to decide, do I
Right.
go to public school or do I go to another private school and try to apply? There's always a home
Right.
for the children.
Well,
And for the employees too.
I mean, well, yeah, because they may attend a charter school in Carroll County, but they are attending a Carroll County public school.
Correct.
So they're part of the responsibility of the public school system.
Correct.
The teachers, they can move around from one school to another public school at the needs of the public school system or at the desire of the teacher.
Both, and that's how it is today.
Yeah, I know that's how it is today with the public school system. Is the charter school now going to be in a mix of that?
Yes,
So,
it'll be in the play of all of the other schools and staffing, yeah.
because if you have a plus-up of teachers here, but all of a sudden you have a real need up in FSK for whatever, or North Carroll, whatever it may be,
Right,
you have the obligation to support that. You could pull from that charter school as another feeder to them.
right,
And those teachers are well aware and all that kind of stuff.
yeah. One of the other questions that you asked that we didn't get to address was, why, if all of the other schools are open, why would a parent choose a charter school? And as we suggested earlier, a parent might be interested in more of the classical curriculum that they are saying that they would offer. But another, I think, point of interest for parents will be class size. And because of all the blueprint talk that we've been doing over the past 3 years, parents, especially those in the southern region, are, have been told directly that class sizes will probably go up as we move resources to meet the fiscal compliance piece of Blueprint. Now, this is a complicated relationship here, because certain things could happen. For instance, you know, if we get the waiver, and if anything changes in the balance of how we have to enforce fiscal compliance, it could mean that we don't have to raise class sizes the way we were going to have to. So that could end up not being much of an issue in the southern region, depending on what happens. And then on the other hand, with a charter school, they may not always be able to control exactly the class size that they have, depending on budget, and, you know, they'll have to deal with the same realities that the rest of us deal with, where we'd like our class sizes to be one way, but because we have to provide these other resources, class sizes need to go up sometimes. So I think that class size it could be one of the factors in parents choosing a charter school, and that's something that we'll just have to keep our eye on.
Okay.
And I think you've kind of said it, but I think people seem to be confused. So if they submit an application, they comply with Maryland law, you can't say, back it up a year. You can't say, we don't want you right now. You have no choice.
Right.
That's correct. It's an objective review process in accordance with the law and the policy. And opposition to the charter philosophy, or this isn't a good business decision this year, those are not reasons that the state board has approved. We really do have to treat them as part of the public school offerings. They've said several times that we can't have an us versus them mentality, so it's very much objective. Now, that's in the charter application approval. Then we need to negotiate the charter agreement. How much services will they be purchasing from the school system? So, for example, on maintenance, will they be paying back money to the school system so that our maintenance crews can come down to the charter school to provide repairs and maintenance and whatnot? Or will the landlord assume that as part of the lease payment? Remains to be seen.
It's a lot of work.
Yeah.
I mean, again, I won't say agnostic to it, but I mean, it's not, I'm just proud of what the schools are doing. And if this is a step forward in adding another classical curriculum or something, yeah, I mean, it just sounds like a lot of work that, you know, to get from where we are now to where we want to be, or they want to be, and us. I mean, it's not a, like you said, a we, them, so.
And keep in mind, the board has not made a decision yet. The board is still waiting for the superintendent and her staff to finish the review process, and then Dr. McCabe will make a recommendation to the board to either approve or disapprove. So right now, the stance that the school administration is taking is one of neutrality. They're not advocating for this, nor are they opposed to this philosophically. We're trying to review everything as the law requires that we do.
And you've only had it for 2 weeks.
Right, and this will be an iterative process. Most likely, you know, there will be a cycle of feedback given, and, you know, they will have time to address the issues and questions that we present, and then we'll go from there.
And I appreciate, Commissioner Rothstein, your faith and your confidence in our public school system. That's coming out loud and clear, and we do appreciate that. And frankly, we would love for all of the kids in Carroll County to attend Carroll County Public Schools. But again, the bottom line is that, you know, parents want options, and, you know, they need those options, and, you know, we just have to abide by that. But again, we would love to have them all, but again, it comes down to parent choice and parent options.
Any questions, guys?
I just have one brief one. So the agreement you talked about there being including possibility of maintenance and so forth for the property. Is it safe to assume, and I hate to assume things, that the nonprofit piece of that would be completely separate from any interaction within the Board of Education or Carroll County Public School System? So it's going to run parallel on its own?
Yes.
Okay.
All right. Well,
Thank you.
Thanks.
do you want to move on to the AIB waiver?
Sure.
Okay, I have a brief comment.
Two easy subjects.
Really, and not complicated at all. As you know, and as some of you talked about this morning over in your meeting, we submitted our waiver request to the AIB on April 1st. A letter of support signed by all 5 commissioners was included, and we thank you so much for that support. The AIB scheduled us for an oral argument on the waiver, which was held on April 17th at 1 p.m. Mr. Shockney, Mr. O'Neill, and I presented that day and answered questions from the AIB members. During the hearing, Chair Leggett announced that the AIB would not make a decision that day, but would schedule to do so no later than May 1st, and they have scheduled to make that decision on April 28th at a 2 p.m. meeting. So that's now a very, very important date for us. I mentioned the letter of support from the commissioners, which we deeply appreciated, and our waiver also included a letter of support signed by all members of the Carroll delegation. And I cannot thank them enough for their support in this process, especially Delegate Stanko, who worked very hard with his Appropriations Committee chair, and that made a big difference. Lastly, our waiver included a letter of support from the leadership of both of our certified unions, both CCEA and APSASCO. Their memberships are most directly impacted by the planned changes as a part of our compliance plan, and they've been true partners with us in this process. And I also want to thank our school community for their interest and support as well. We were aware that in the months leading to the waiver hearing that citizens were contacting the state leaders and the AIB, and we heard that the AIB received a few hundred emails during that time. But then once we submitted our waiver, we asked the community to notify the AIB of their support for the waiver, and at our hearing, Chair Leggett shared that after the waiver was submitted on April 1st, the AIB received well over 1,200 emails from the community in support. And Mr. Leggett even read an email from Career and Technology Principal Tom Riddle. Our community has an important voice in this process, and I'm grateful that so many have expressed their views, and I think that will be very, very helpful as the AIB is making its decision. Another way in which I want to acknowledge your support is the role that your recent history of funding played throughout this process, not just the AIB waiver hearing, but the discussions that were held with state leaders in Annapolis in the past few months. I refer you to Appendix A in the April 1st waiver packet, which shows that the last several fiscal years of CCPS funding from both the state and the local level. The chart illustrates that in the period from FY09 through 19, when the school system went through so many reductions, the primary driver was a reduction in direct state aid, and that totaled over $16 million. It also shows the increased commitment you've made to the Board of Education consistently in the latest fiscal years. For some state leaders, I think this understanding was surprising to them. It also has been a significant positive factor in the background conversation leading to this AIB waiver process. That funding effort has been significant and important for some of the state leaders that we've talked to in this blueprint conversation. But here at the local level, it's equally significant. Last year, your effort allowed us to meet the career ladder framework that we needed for Blueprint, which seemed like such a daunting blueprint task, and more importantly, establish a competitive starting teacher salary at a moment when it was absolutely desperately needed in order to stabilize our workforce in the school system. The impacts were immediate, as we had one of our most successful hiring years ever at a time when it was needed the most. The funding level of $13 million you've preliminarily set in this year's budget is also very important. In the midst of the Blueprint turmoil, it has allowed us to continue to operate the system without reducing any important programs, to keep our commitments to our support service employees, and to quiet the unrest around operating budget potential cuts. Specifically, you have allowed us to fund our increased utility costs, and I know everyone's facing increases in utility costs these days. We're going to be able to honor the third year of our salary increases to our CASE, AFSCME, and food service employees. So those are our clericals, our custodians, the folks that, we certainly could not live without. Keep the outdoor school operating, which we heard loud and clearly was a big priority for our community. Fund the planned increase for our bus contractors, drivers, and bus assistants, and we'd be able to maintain the student devices in grades 3 through 5. So here in public, I do want to thank you for that early commitment. And finally, I want to take a moment to clarify what the waiver means. If the AIB grants it on April 28th, it will be an extension of time to meet Blueprint requirements, but not a forgiveness of those requirements. It is also an opportunity to work with the AIB's consultants to revisit our compliance plan and seek any efficiencies or other promising strategies, and we've already started to do that with them. It also will mean that it remains important for all of us and the community to stay knowledgeable and engaged in the process. Let me pause and see what questions you have at this point.
Did you request a waiver for multiple years or just 1 year, and what do you think you might get?
So originally, we had put in our waiver request and talked about, 3 to 5 years. It was evident at the hearing that the AIB members were much more comfortable going on a year-to-year basis. And so at this point, that's what we're thinking will happen. And I think part of that is to make sure that our communication we're in communication with them directly and on a particular time schedule through that year, and that they can see the support that we're getting from our community, from our commissioners, and just make sure that everybody is on the same page, working together to make the Blueprint happen in Carroll County.
Do you know if any other jurisdiction asked for a waiver?
Not a waiver like ours. I know that there were some Eastern Shore counties that were looking at the small schools waiver, and that may affect just one school if the school were under 200 students. But we don't have any schools that would qualify for that. So with the kind of waiver we're looking at, we are the only school system at this point who is seeking a waiver.
And as you said publicly, I want to thank you guys for that. That's a little bit of work.
Just a little bit.
A couple things. While you were talking, you said in your comments to quiet the unrest. Actually, I think it has opposite effect. It created a louder community to get behind the needs of Carroll County Public Schools. There was nothing quiet from the get-go, and I think the steps forward with requesting a waiver, we're putting our best foot forward where we're working together. I mean, one thing Carroll County does really well, and we do so much really well, is we communicate. We're consistent in our communications between us, the county commissioners, myself and colleagues, to the Board of Ed, to the delegation. I'll tell you, I served down at Maryland Association of Counties on the board and on the legislative committee with Commissioner Kyler. And every Wednesday during session and throughout the year, whether it's the winter conference or summer conference, this is the topic. And it's not the elephant in the room, it's the herd of elephants. And everybody's trying to figure out, because they know there's a problem, to how to come up with a solution. And the way we come up with a solution is through our consistent messaging, through our communications. You know, it was relatively easy for me to accept the needs up to $13 million operationally. And fortunately, we as a board are saying, yes, $13 million is where we can go to because of the requirements you have. And it's all requirements driven. I just want to make sure that we stay consistent on messaging that those are the needs. You know, the faculty, the administration, everybody in the schools, they're watching and they see it and they talk and they hear it. I mean, as you know, my son's part of that community, and yeah, it's amazing how fast word gets around. But the best word that we can say is that we're going to be consistent. We're going to stay on message. We're going to continue. I know it's still in draft and there's no promises, but there's no reason why that would change, that 13 million. And I look forward to Monday, to getting that 1-year extension. And then from there, continuing to work with Mako and others to figure out how to mitigate the challenges for the following year when it comes to the blueprint.
And
Yeah.
And I'd love to see AIB and Carroll County Public Schools come up with a play on words, a blueprint for how to fix blueprint.
Yeah.
And hopefully you guys are headed that way. One question, there's so much confusion about budget, about all of this. Legally, you can sit here and tell us how you're gonna use the money. By law, we can't hold you to that. We can't tell you how to spend your money. There's some stuff, if you want to use a fund balance, you need permission. There's a few things if you jump categories too wild, but we can't micromanage how you spend money, correct?
That is correct. Within the categories, the commissioners do not have that authority. You have the authority, of course, to approve transfers from one category to another.
But I think we have these quarterly meetings and we have a level of trust, hopefully that goes both ways, that what you're saying is what you intend to do. But I wanted to make that plain for the public.
And I think our school system has been very transparent every year with the request and the expenditures. I mean, I know the staff, you know, they bring you guys the binders to make sure that you can oversee and.
You guys give us a binder I'm not capable of reading.
See, there you go. And I do appreciate, Commissioner Rothstein, your comments, you know, regarding the communication. You know, I reach out to every single one of you from time to time. And I do hope the communication does maintain with either myself or the superintendent or Mr. O'Neill or Mr. Shockney. It is really important for all of us to continue those communications and being on the same page. You know, whether, you know, however the board votes and upholding that vote and making sure that the message is out there. You know, we still want people to email the AIB. It's not a done deal. We still want to continue having the conversations with you regarding the 13 million. You know, we have the promises, and it's just the continuation of maintaining those words that have been spoken and said, that's where we stand. And I do appreciate all of that.
Yeah, I too appreciate it. I mean, you listened and you understood our plight. I mean, we were desperate. We were so in need, and you listened. I mean, you didn't tell us, well, you know, just let them know that you're not going to follow the requirements, because you know we couldn't do that. I mean, legally, we have to do, you know, what's set for us. through the state. So again, I just appreciate you hearing the plight that we were in and for coming forth.
The waving of the white flag.
And I'll add that I am so appreciative of our parents, our school community, and our staff through this, because they truly have woken up to the challenges of Carroll County Public Schools, and we've seen a level of participation that I have never seen in my time with the school system. So they are watching every meeting, they are listening to what we're saying, and they are talking about it, not only on social media, but which we, hear about a lot, but as Mr. Rothstein said, in the hallways, in their schools, in their communities, at the ball game, on the sidelines, we are the conversation right now. And I think, while I think that it's been stressful for our employees, and I certainly don't want to add to any of their stress, I think having an educated and knowledgeable workforce about the issues and where we are with them is extremely important.
But I think it's really, once the whole plan began to roll out, once everyone saw how it was going to affect all of our
Yes.
schools, I
Yes.
think that really made a difference.
Yes.
We thought outdoor school had garnered a lot of support.
Right.
But when it came out how the tier schools would be staffed, tier 1s through 4, I think that really showed folks how it was going to impact their schools.
And plus, making sure the community understands how the implementation process, it wasn't that the school system sat around and waited and just threw something out there. Even at the time, Mr. Kyler being on the board, it was a lot of waiting to see what needed to be done, what had to be submitted. It was never sitting around and waiting till the last minute. It was always, we had to wait for direction. And making sure the community understood that now too. Because, yes, there has been the rhetoric of the school system kind of threw this together when that was not the case. It's a lot of preparing and steps that had to be taken.
And I think a lot of the public doesn't seem to understand, you guys, and occasionally I was on the other side of the street, have been fighting this before the bill passed, when it was still the Kerwin Commission. People would say, why are we just hearing about it this year? Well, because this is the first time they've listened. It's been a fight, and I think Carroll County was one of the leaders in that fight, and hopefully this works out because of that.
Both you and I know, many parents don't technically or pay attention until it affects their home or their child.
Exactly.
We've
Yeah.
been through that when we were,
Yeah, we see the same thing. A building lot gets approved, and when the stakes go up and the loader moves there, then they're like, why did this happen? So same thing. And then, you guys, questions, comments?
No questions, but I think Dr. Dorsey pointed it out best. You talked about the plight of the school system, but I think it's bigger than that. It's the plight of the community, because we're all in this together. I've said this countless times, and I know when Dr. McCabe was in a couple weeks back or a month or so. It's all of us together, and that's what the people expect from us. That's why we're all sitting at this table, is to work together for the community. And I'm glad that we're able to do that.
I agree with that entirely.
I have a comment. I think it's important also to fundamentally let the public know that what you see today with Blueprint is not necessarily what it might be tomorrow. Blueprint's always been evolving, and I think it will continue to evolve over time. I think the state legislature has seen, obviously, the financial implications of what's going on with their last session in raising taxes and making cuts. And then the issue with almost $2 to $4 billion expected in lawsuits against the juvenile justice sexual abuse issues that they're facing. They may come together here later this year just to raise taxes to pay for those settlements. But if there's any silver lining in all of this, I think the blueprint that you see today might be relaxed as we move along. Because I think the folks in Annapolis realize that although many aspects of Blueprint are terrific and great on paper, that it's just not feasible to pay for all of these. So as we move forward and as we plan things, the requirements we see today may not be the requirements we see tomorrow. And it's important to, and as we've done on the board, take a continuous look of Blueprint's requirements and how we meet them. But the onerous requirements we see today may not be so onerous tomorrow, especially as the legislature comes together and maybe rewrite major portions of Blueprint. But I'm appreciative of the partnership we have with you, with PZAM, the Superintendent's Association of Maryland, with so many stakeholders, and now even educators. Teacher unions across the state are realizing these Blueprint mandates are affecting their jobs, their members. Everyone seems to be coming together to realize that we all need to work together to do what's best for teachers and students, and I just appreciate your support.
I'll let you know, I agree with you that things may change, but they're holding the cards right now. And, we worked with Senator Reedy, remember, in his office, trying to delay things. This was a couple of years ago. And he was in sync with Senator Ferguson. They were crossing aisles, they were trying to figure out. But the House delegates and all those guys, they...
It's a different dynamic.
It's very different. And there was nothing we could do to change it. Not because we're red or blue or whatever. It was every county was going through the same thing, and we could not get them to bend. So this, I think, is the best next step to give us a little bit more breathing room to do exactly what you said, Steve, but getting that House of Delegates to shift off of some of this is very, very challenging. So
I think a major concession they made was actually creating this Blueprint waiver process. Because up until this year, the only waiver we had in Blueprint was for the pre-K requirement. But as you know, many of us have been advocating for just a waiver process in general for everything. And Delegate Stanko was very instrumental in working to get that even approved. So
yeah,
that's a silver lining I see happening. And I'm hopeful that we can see a decrease in Blueprint mandates moving forward. But time will tell, and you're right. They hold the cards, not us.
That's why, no, I absolutely agree. This is a great step, and I think that's why us collectively moving in the right direction, staying on message, with the money that we're proposing, is important. That we give a little, they give a little, we keep going, and then they finally say, okay, Carroll County, like we said years ago, you got it, because they did, and that got turned on its head. So that's why it's so important that we continue to stay on message. So, yeah.
On message, and also just again to reiterate this sort of trust that we built. We appreciate that in this whole process, which has been difficult, complicated, and so forth, we continue to talk and work through to make sure that we made the best decision going forth. And I think we're on a great track, and I appreciate the trust you put in us and that we continue to put in you all as well.
Do we want to look at any other subject, or I feel these two are covered, correct?
Yeah, these two are covered, I think. We can certainly answer any other questions.
I got a question. I know, other counties are looking at, like I said, the same problem, coming with different solutions. And I think, is it Harford County, or a couple counties, are doing away with summer school or something, like decisions, Harford? I mean, is that in our, I didn't even know summer school still existed.
Well,
but-
we have been, the summer schools that we have offered, we have only been able to offer through grants. So we don't have the funding, the regular funding,
Okay.
to offer summer school ongoing. So especially during COVID times, we were able to use the federal grant monies to provide summer programs for our students. And as those funds have dwindled, you know, we have been able to provide less and less
So we're
of that
relying on federal grants.
for a lot of our after-school tutoring and things like that, yes.
Wow, okay.
Anybody else?
All right.
Are we ready to adjourn? Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. All those in favor? If you guys want to stay another hour.